There's nothing quite like seeing training camp in person, and after watching Day 4 of Washington Commanders practice up close, a handful of storylines stood out clearly enough to separate real signal from typical offseason noise. Let's break down everything worth knowing straight from the sidelines. Let's start with the injury updates that came through during practice. Tight end John Bates is expected to miss a couple of weeks with a hamstring strain, and center Nick Allegretti is anticipated to be out roughly a week, though that timeline depends on how well he hits his recovery benchmarks. The team also brought in 10 total tryout players around this stretch of camp, including a pair of centers, a guard, a few tight ends, a cornerback, and a couple of defensive backs. None of these names are realistically competing for actual playing time this season. This is purely about building camp body depth, especially at positions like cornerback, given the uncertainty still surrounding Trey Amos's return timeline. Now let's get into the real standouts from this practice, starting with quarterback Jayden Daniels. His arm looked genuinely different watching in person, sharper, snappier, with real zip on the football. There's a tendency for people to downplay his arm talent given his leaner frame, but watching him sling the ball live erases any doubt. He reportedly went 12 of 16 in team drills, and even facing a barrage of exotic pressure looks from this new defensive scheme. The ball was consistently coming out of his hand in a hurry. He looked decisive rather than hesitant, a real step forward compared to some of the chatter out of the first couple days of camp. And here's a small but meaningful detail. On plays that would likely have resulted in a sack or gotten blown dead in a real game, Daniels kept working through his reads and getting rid of the football rather than bailing the pocket prematurely, a notably different approach than one of the backup quarterbacks who scrambled out of clean pockets multiple times during the same practice. Next, the hype around edge rusher Odafe Oweh is absolutely real. Watching him bend the edge in person, it's some of the sharpest, crispest corner bending seen from this roster in a long time, standing right alongside some of the most explosive pass rushers this franchise has fielded in recent memory. He was consistently beating veteran left tackle Laramie Tunsil off the snap with a first step so quick it nearly looked like he was jumping the count. He's got real length, real feel for the rush, and doesn't overrun plays chasing sacks that aren't there. Every indication from this offseason and now confirmed in person suggests he's going to be a legitimate double-digit sack threat once the season begins. On the back end, safety Nick Cross looked like the fastest meaningful player on this entire roster. He's not necessarily racking up interceptions in every single practice, but he's consistently around the football, flying to the ball with real physicality, even without pads on. Wherever the action is happening, Cross seems to be in the immediate vicinity. There's also a genuinely exciting story developing at tight end. With John Bates now sidelined for a couple of weeks, Ben Sinnott saw the most targets of any player in team drills on this particular day. He did have a couple of drops, including one on a crossing route that would have gone for a real chunk gain in stride, but the overall trend is unmistakable. This tight end room, as a whole, is being featured heavily in the passing game in a way that simply hasn't been the norm for this franchise historically. Colson Yankoff and Lawrence Cager also flashed in the passing game during this same stretch. Beyond just the targets themselves, the sheer amount of pre-snap motion involving tight ends specifically has been remarkable to watch, with some plays featuring players motioning multiple times before the snap even happens. It's clearly designed to keep opposing defenses off balance, though it will be worth watching closely once the season begins to make sure all that movement stays within the rules, given how many players are sometimes moving simultaneously. At cornerback, Rasul Douglas currently looks like the best defensive back on this roster, especially with Trey Amos not yet on the field this year. He shows real length, real feel in coverage, and stays draped over receivers even on completions, including one impressively tight coverage rep against Luke McCaffrey, where the pass still connected but Douglas was draped all over him the entire route. He's moving like the clear top cornerback on this roster right now. The kicking competition also delivered a notable data point. In a pressure-simulated drill where the offense ran a play with limited time on the clock before the field goal unit had to rush out and attempt a kick at increasing distances, Drew Stevens got the first opportunity over Jake Moody and ended up missing at least one attempt, possibly two. Moody, by contrast, made every single one of his kicks. It's clear Stevens has the stronger leg based on how the ball comes off his foot, but Moody's clean accuracy in this specific pressure setting is a meaningful data point worth tracking as this competition continues. Among the rookies, linebacker Sonny Styles should have come away with a couple of interceptions during this practice, continuing to show off real range and closing speed. Even if he sometimes looks like he's processing information a bit slowly in real time. That's genuinely understandable, though, given that he only converted to linebacker within the past couple of years after starting his college career as a highly regarded safety recruit. He also delivered a legitimately physical near hit on Luke McCaffrey after a completed pass, showing real want-to as a hitter even without pads on. Receiver Antonio Williams also continued flashing real polish in his route running, arguably running some of the crispest, most sudden routes on the entire roster. He did have a drop during a somewhat crowded, poorly spaced route concept, but he also earned reps with the first-team offense at some point during this practice, a promising sign for his development trajectory. In terms of actual target volume, Luke McCaffrey appeared to be the most heavily targeted receiver of the entire practice, hauling in multiple completions and continuing to show real growth in his route running and ability to turn upfield after the catch. Jalen Lane also looked noticeably more precise in his route running compared to previous stretches, adding a nice chunk gain up the sideline as well, and Treylon Burks reportedly produced the biggest single offensive chunk play of the entire practice. It's worth emphasizing the broader context here, too. This stage of camp isn't about running a full, wide-open offensive playbook or trying to score touchdowns in team drills. This coaching staff is clearly working through specific situational concepts, mixing under center and shotgun looks, and testing this offense against a defense throwing an enormous variety of exotic pressure packages and disguised coverages at Daniels, including dime packages, 3 safety looks, and pressure coming from entirely unexpected alignments. That's exactly the kind of challenging, realistic look that should genuinely help him continue developing as a quarterback, especially after facing some historically difficult pressure packages against a divisional opponent last season. So here's the overall takeaway from watching this practice in person. Nobody should be either overly discouraged or overly excited based purely on early, unpadded practice observations. This is still just training camp, not a real game, and pads officially come on the very next day, which should start providing a much clearer, more reliable picture of where these position battles genuinely stand. But the early signs on Jayden Daniels to the Commanders.